Late-night roads have a strange way of softening the world, especially when most people are already asleep and the air feels cooler than it should for the season. Streetlights blur into long yellow streaks behind the windshield, and even the familiar hum of the engine sounds quieter, almost respectful of the darkness around it. There's a calmness that settles over the empty highways at those hours, a kind of stillness that makes you believe you're the only one awake, the only one moving through miles of quiet pavement and distant tree lines. Most drivers know that feeling well, the sense that the main road is predictable, safe, and steady, a place where nothing unusual ever really happens as long as you stay on it. But sometimes, out of habit or curiosity, people drift onto smaller side roads without thinking much of it, expecting them to be just as ordinary as the ones they left behind. It's usually something simple that nudges them there, a shortcut they've taken before, a missed exit, a detour sign half hidden behind branches. And in those first few seconds, everything seems fine. The air presses a little colder against the windows, the headlights catch more shadows than shapes, and the world feels a bit quieter than before, but nothing feels wrong enough to turn back. Still, if you've ever found yourself on a back road you didn't mean to take, you know there's a moment, a small, barely noticeable one, when the silence doesn't feel like silence anymore. Maybe it's a sound you can't place, or the way the darkness seems heavier between the trees, or how your own reflection in the glass looks like it's lingering a split second too long. Most people ignore it and keep driving. Others slow down without meaning to. And a few, the ones who truly pay attention, start to realize they may have stepped off the path into something they don't fully understand. Tonight's stories are about those drivers, the ones who left the safety of the main road and discovered too late that some turns were never meant to be taken. I used to take the same route home every night after work, driving the long stretch of highway that led straight through the quieter part of town before it curved toward my neighborhood. It wasn't a complicated drive, just repetitive in that comforting way routines can be, especially after a long day when your body is tired but your mind is still buzzing. Most nights, the air would be cool enough to fog the edges of the windows, and the only sounds came from the steady rhythm of my tires and the soft rattle of something loose in the glove compartment. The highway always felt safe at that hour, wide, familiar, and empty enough that I could relax a little as the world around me went dark. Years ago, someone told me about a shortcut a few streets before my exit, a left turn that cut through a small residential loop and saved me 4 or 5 minutes. I tried it once out of curiosity, and it ended up becoming part of my routine without me even thinking about it. The shortcut was simple: a short road lined with older houses that sat close together, porch lights glowing like amber dots in the night. Even the drive-through felt comforting, the kind of street where kids probably rode bikes during the day and older couples watered their lawns in the evenings. I liked passing through it, honestly. It had that quiet warmth that makes you feel like you're still connected to something ordinary. One night, though, something felt a little off the moment I turned onto the shortcut. Nothing dramatic, just a small shift I couldn't name. The first thing I noticed was that the air on the street looked darker than usual, like the glow from the streetlights wasn't reaching as far as it should. I slowed down slightly, telling myself they'd probably replaced a bulb or two, but there was a heaviness to the shadows that made me sit up straighter. I remembered that the houses were usually close to the road, tucked almost snugly behind small yards and fences, yet as my headlights swept across the street, I realized I couldn't see the houses at all. Not even outlines. That was strange enough that I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and leaned forward a bit, thinking maybe the fog was thicker or my windshield had smeared. But no, the houses weren't there. At first, I didn't panic. I thought maybe I'd turned onto the wrong street earlier, though I didn't recall making any mistake. The road still felt like the shortcut, the angle of the turn, the slight rise in the pavement, the way the trees framed the start of it. But without the houses, the street looked longer, stretched in a way I'd never noticed before. I kept driving slowly, waiting for something familiar to appear, a mailbox, a porch light, even the crooked stop sign near the middle of the road. But all I saw was darkness on both sides, like empty fields instead of backyards. The weirdest part was how quiet it was. Usually, even late at night, there'd be one or two porch lights left on, or the faint sound of a TV through an open window, or a dog barking somewhere in the distance. But that night, the only sound was the gentle hum of my engine and the crunch of loose gravel under my tires. The silence pressed against the windows in a strange way, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Halfway down the road, I looked at the clock, expecting to see that only a minute had passed. But the screen showed 3 minutes later than I expected, though I was barely halfway through the street. I frowned, trying to remember how far I'd driven, but the distance seemed stretched. I drove this shortcut nearly every day. It was never long enough to lose track of time on. Yet as I kept moving, the headlights only revealed more road ahead, more darkness on either side. No houses. No fences, nothing at all. Something tightened in my chest then, not panic, but a quiet awareness that I didn't understand where I was anymore. I slowed the car further, letting my foot hover over the brake, telling myself that maybe construction crews had cleared the lots earlier in the day and I hadn't noticed. But that didn't feel right. The darkness didn't look like cleared land, it looked like absence. That was when a faint thought crossed my mind. I should turn around. There was no real reason to think that, no clear danger, but a small voice inside me whispered it, soft and steady. I glanced at my mirrors, expecting to see the soft glow of the highway behind me, but the rear view reflected only blackness. I tried to remember if the street had always dipped slightly at the start, but everything behind me looked like ink, as if the headlights couldn't touch it. Still, I forced myself to breathe and kept driving. I just needed to reach the end of the road. The shortcut formed a loop. It had to reconnect eventually. Every logical part of me held onto that idea. But the deeper I went, the more it felt like logic wasn't helping anymore. The road still stretched out ahead of me, perfectly straight, without any sign of the small curve near the end. I knew it should have been coming soon. I'd memorized its timing, yet it didn't appear. The unease settled in my wrists, making my hands tighten around the steering wheel. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The temperature inside the car was dropping. Not by much, just enough that I could feel a thin chill slide across my shoulders, as if cold air had crept in through a window that wasn't open. I raised my hand toward the vents, expecting them to be blowing colder air, but they were off. The chill wasn't coming from the car. It was coming from outside. I rolled the window up even though it was already closed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small detail surfaced, something I hadn't thought of in years. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to tell me that places could shift sometimes. Land remembers, she would say, and every now and then it shows you something it hasn't forgotten yet. I didn't usually take those old sayings seriously, but the memory made the hairs on my arms lift. Finally, after what felt like far too long, I saw something up ahead, a faint shape, maybe a telephone pole or signpost. My shoulders relaxed slightly just to have something familiar in view. As I drove closer, the shape sharpened into the outline of a house, but not one I recognized. It wasn't the right size or color, and it sat much farther back from the road than any house on the shortcut ever had. The porch light was on, but the bulb flickered faintly, like it was struggling to stay lit. I slowed down as I passed, trying to see more details, but the light was too dim. and the yard stretched too far into darkness to make sense of anything. That should have been comforting, a house is a house, but something about it made me uneasy. I glanced in my mirror to catch another look. The porch light was still visible behind me, but the house was gone. Only the light remained, hovering faintly in the dark like a floating ember that slowly blinked out. My breathing went tight then. I reached for my phone, planning to call someone, anyone, just to have another voice in the car, but the screen refused to turn on, dead, even though I'd charged it earlier. I set it back down carefully, as if moving too fast might make something notice me. At this point, logic wasn't helping. I'd been on the same straight road for what felt like 10 minutes, and that shortcut wasn't even a quarter that length. My mind tried to grab onto familiar explanations. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was driving slower than I thought, maybe I'd mixed up the streets, but none of those ideas held. My mind felt clear, too clear. Then I saw the end of the road, or at least I thought I did. The pavement seemed to fade into a lighter patch, almost like a clearing or intersection. Relief hit me hard enough that I exhaled a shaky breath, eager to get back onto the main road. But as I reached it, I realized the clearing wasn't an intersection. It was just a brighter patch of darkness, like the headlights caught a different shade of empty space. That was the moment I finally stopped the car. As I sat there, engine idling, staring at a road that didn't seem to lead anywhere real. My hands felt numb, but I knew I couldn't keep going. I didn't know what waited deeper inside that darkness, and I didn't want to find out. So I did the only thing that made sense. I put the car in reverse. Backing up on a dark road feels unnatural, like you're moving against the flow of something. The taillights glowed red behind me, barely illuminating the stretch of road I'd come from. But slowly, foot by foot, the way back looked a little more recognizable. The darkness behind the car loosened just enough for me to breathe normally again. I didn't look to either side as I reversed. I didn't want to know if anything was watching. As after what felt like forever, I saw the faint curve of the main road reappear in the rearview mirror. I stopped, switched to drive, and rolled forward without thinking. The moment my tires touched the highway, the air inside the car warmed by a few degrees like I'd stepped out of cold water. I didn't dare look back. When I got home, the shortcut looked normal again on the map. The next morning, I drove past its entrance just to see. The houses were there, close to the road, yards tidy, everything exactly how it always was. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the entire thing, if exhaustion had twisted something in my perception. But that evening, as I sat in the driveway letting the car cool down, I noticed something stuck under the windshield wiper, a thin layer of fine black dust that didn't look like dirt or soot. I wiped it away, but it clung to my fingers longer than it should have, as if I'd brushed against something old. I haven't taken that shortcut again. I drive the long way around, no matter how late it is. Because even though the street looks normal during the day, I can't forget the feeling of driving through a place where the houses weren't gone, but simply never there at all. I used to work the evening shift for a delivery company, the kind of job where most of your time is spent alone in a car, moving from one quiet street to another while the rest of the town settles into their nighttime routines. I didn't mind it. There was something peaceful about driving through neighborhoods after sunset, the kind of calm that only exists when porch lights are the brightest things around and the roads feel like long, empty corridors. Most nights were predictable. The soft hum of my heater, the smell of cardboard from the packages, and the occasional sound of gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled into driveways. I got used to the rhythm of it, how silence could feel like a companion instead of something eerie. There was one particular route that took me through the outskirts of town, where the houses grew farther apart and the streetlights didn't quite reach every corner. It wasn't dangerous or abandoned, just quiet. The kind of quiet that made you drive a little slower without realizing it. On the far end of that route, there was a curve in the road that dipped slightly toward a drainage ditch. The asphalt there always looked damp even on dry nights, and weeds grew thick around the guardrail. I remember thinking it would be an easy place to have a minor accident, nothing serious, just the kind where someone misjudges the turn and ends up with a flat tire. I'd never seen anyone pulled over there, though, not until that evening. It was a little after 9:00 p.m. when I rounded that curve and noticed a white cargo van sitting half in the ditch. It wasn't unusual to see older work vehicles around town. Contractors used them, landscapers, small business owners, but this one seemed too still. Its headlights were off, but the engine was idling. The sound reached me before I even passed it, a low, steady rumble that felt oddly loud against the otherwise quiet road. I slowed down automatically, thinking someone might be inside needing help. But as my headlights swept across the windshield, I saw a man sitting perfectly upright in the driver's seat. He wasn't looking at me, he wasn't looking anywhere. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed forward like he was waiting for something ahead of him. For a moment, I considered stopping, but something about the way he didn't move, not even to glance at my car, made me keep driving. It felt like I had interrupted something, like I was intruding on a moment that wasn't mine. I knew I should have felt concern, but what I felt instead was a strange, quiet discomfort I couldn't explain. As I drove past, I kept him in my peripheral vision until he disappeared behind me. The silence inside my car felt heavier after that, as if the van had taken all the normal nighttime calm and replaced it with something colder. I checked my rearview mirror once, expecting to see the van still in the ditch, but for a few seconds the road behind me looked almost too dark to make anything out. Eventually, the curve faded from sight. I exhaled slowly, telling myself I had imagined the tension. People sit in cars all the time. Maybe he was just waiting for a tow truck. I delivered the next package and tried to move on, but as I pulled away from the driveway, I heard something unusual, the faint sound of an engine approaching slowly from behind. I glanced at my side mirror, expecting to see another delivery driver or someone heading home. Instead, I saw two headlights crest the hill in the exact rhythm of the white van's low beams. At first, I didn't want to assume anything. Lots of vans look similar at night. But as it drew closer, matching my speed almost perfectly, I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach. I accelerated a bit, more out of instinct than fear. The van matched me, staying just far enough back that I couldn't see the driver's face. It didn't try to pass, didn't slow down, didn't drift. It just followed. The road ahead stayed empty, giving the moment a strange intimacy that made my skin prickle. I turned right at the next intersection, taking a street I rarely used. The van turned right too. I didn't see the blinker. The movement was too smooth, too quick. I told myself I was overthinking it. Drivers take the same roads all the time. But when I reached the next left turn, one I knew would lead deeper into the suburb, I took it sharply, and the van followed without hesitation. The way it shadowed me felt deliberate, not coincidental. The streetlights flickered weakly here, making everything look washed out and pale. I pressed my foot down a little harder, enough to put distance between us, but the van kept the exact same gap, as if we were tethered together by an invisible rope. As a faint thought crossed my mind then, what if he's waiting for me to pull over? I didn't like that thought. But a more unsettling question followed. How long had he been behind me? Did he pull out of the ditch the second I disappeared around the curve? There was a turn ahead, a narrow connector road mostly used by residents, not pass-through traffic. I had never taken it before, but I turned anyway. Gravel popped under my tires as the pavement gave way to a mix of dirt and broken patches. My headlights skimmed over unfamiliar yards and low bushes. I risked a glance into the mirror, expecting to see the van hesitate at the rough terrain. But it didn't. As it followed effortlessly, engine humming steadily, the headlights bouncing just slightly with each uneven patch of road. My hands felt cold on the steering wheel. I thought of calling someone, but my phone was clipped into the dashboard mount, and reaching for it felt like it would require me to take my attention off the road for too long. Instead, I kept driving, scanning for an intersection or sign, something that might lead me back to a main road. But the connector twisted more than I expected, dipping between clusters of trees where the darkness felt thicker. The van stayed behind me, unwavering, its presence constant in my mirrors like a bright, silent shadow. There came a point where panic softened into something else, resignation maybe. A quiet understanding that I couldn't keep circling side roads forever. I needed to stop. I needed to face whatever this was. So when I saw a small gravel pull-off near an abandoned bus stop, I slowed down and eased the car to the side. The van rolled to a stop behind me, its headlights steady and unblinking. For a moment, neither of us moved. The night had settled into a heavy stillness, broken only by the idle rumble of our engines. I turned off my car, telling myself it was just a person. A person could be reasoned with. But a part of me, the part that had tightened when I saw him sitting motionless in the ditch, didn't fully believe that. I stepped out into the cool night air, the gravel shifting under my feet. I walked slowly toward the van, lifting a hand slightly so the driver wouldn't be startled. The closer I got, the more the headlights forced my eyes to narrow. I reached the driver's side door, half expecting it to swing open suddenly. But it didn't. The window was rolled up, tinted slightly, but not enough to hide the fact that the seat was empty. Completely empty. I froze. The van was still idling, engine steady and warm beneath the hood. But there was no one inside, no one in the passenger seat, no movement in the back, nothing. I stepped back, scanning the ground for footprints. Someone would have had to get out quickly. But the gravel was undisturbed except for my own tracks. A breeze moved through the trees behind me, bringing a faint scent of damp soil and something metallic. I felt it on my neck, cold and deliberate. I turned around slowly, expecting to see someone nearby, but the bus stop was empty. The road was empty. The night looked the same as before, yet something felt different. Watched. The van's engine suddenly sputtered, not as if it was dying, but as if it were reacting to something. The headlights flickered once. The silence around me deepened, becoming almost tangible. I felt the urge to get back in my car, not out of panic, but out of a deep, instinctive need to be enclosed, protected. I backed away, not taking my eyes off the van until I reached the door of my car. I got in, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the van was still there, idling quietly, headlights cutting into the darkness. But as I reversed and pulled out onto the road, the van didn't follow. It stayed still, unmoving, like it had never planned to leave that spot at all. I found my way back to the main streets without thinking, my body operating on autopilot while my mind replayed the image of that empty driver's seat. When I finally reached the well-lit parts of town, I pulled over at a gas station and sat there with the engine off, letting my breathing settle. The clock on the dashboard told me only 20 minutes had passed since I first saw the van in the ditch. It felt like hours. For weeks after, every time I drove near that curve, I scanned the side of the road. Most nights it was empty. But once in a while, I'd glimpse something pale through the trees, the back end of a white van angled slightly into the ditch. And though I never stopped again, I noticed something else. It always looked like it was waiting, not broken down, not abandoned. Just waiting. I've always had a strange relationship with early mornings. There's something about driving before the sun fully rises that makes the world feel softer, like everything is still deciding whether it wants to wake up or stay asleep. When I used to work the opening shift at the small hardware store just outside town, I'd leave home around 5:15 a.m., right when the air was at its coldest and the roads were still wrapped in blue-tinted darkness. Most mornings were quiet and ordinary. The heater would take a few minutes to warm up. My coffee would sit untouched in the cup holder until I trusted myself to sip from it, and the radio stayed off because I liked the sound of the engine humming against the silence. It felt peaceful, almost meditative. But on certain days, especially in late autumn, thick fog would roll in from the fields outside town and settle along the road like a slow-moving tide. The fog didn't bother me usually. It gave the world a kind of muted beauty, soft, pale, and slightly blurred around the edges. But that morning the fog felt different. Heavier, colder, and oddly still, like it had weight to it. I noticed it the moment I stepped outside. The air felt damp on my skin, and even the porch light seemed to struggle to cut through the whiteness drifting across the lawn. The highway was empty as I merged onto it, the fog making the familiar stretch of pavement feel longer than usual. My headlights carved out only a small cone of visibility, just enough to see the dividing lines and a few yards of grass on either side. I rolled the window down a crack, hoping the cool air would help me stay focused, and listened to the soft hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Everything felt normal enough, though. I'd driven in fog countless times. I knew the turns, the speed limits, the way the world faded into white and returned again a few seconds later. Then, a few miles down the highway, I reached a patch of fog that was thicker than anything I'd seen before. It hovered in the low dip between two gentle hills, a dense bank of white that looked almost solid. I slowed down instinctively, not wanting to rush into it. Something about the fog felt unnatural, like a wall instead of vapor. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop by a degree or two as I got closer. The steering wheel felt colder in my hands. I leaned forward slightly and squinted into the haze. That's when I saw the outline of a person standing inside it. I didn't see them all at once. It was more like pieces of them began to form as my car crept closer, a faint silhouette, a darker shape against the white, the suggestion of shoulders and a head. They weren't moving. They weren't walking or signaling or even turning. They were just standing in the center of the fog bank like they had stepped out to wait for something. I slowed down to nearly a crawl, my heartbeat settling somewhere uncomfortably high in my chest. At first, I thought maybe they were a stranded driver who'd pulled over and gotten disoriented in the fog. Maybe they needed help. But then a strange thought crossed my mind. Why are they standing in the middle of the lane instead of on the shoulder? My headlights reached them slowly, illuminating only fragments, the outline of a coat, the faint shape of legs, the impression of someone turned slightly away from me, as if looking toward the tree line rather than the road. Their posture was rigid but not unnatural, just still, too still. I tapped the brakes lightly and let the car roll forward inch by inch. As I got closer, the fog thickened around the figure, distorting the details. Shadows flickered along the edges of their form, making it impossible to see their face or any clear features. I opened my mouth to call out, but something in my body stopped me, a small instinctual hesitation, the kind that comes from a feeling rather than a thought. The air felt heavier. The fog pressed against the car windows with a quiet, muffled weight. Well, then something changed. I blinked just once and the figure shifted, not gradually, not by stepping. They were suddenly turned slightly more toward me as if they had moved closer in the fraction of a second my eyes weren't focused. I froze. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I hadn't seen them move. I hadn't heard anything. But they were closer, no question. My headlights flickered faintly as if reacting to the moisture in the air. The beam cut across the figure again, and they seemed to lean ever so slightly toward the car. The fog swirled thicker around them, hiding their face completely. I felt a tension in my shoulders that I couldn't explain. Something about the way they stood made the air feel colder, like the temperature had dropped another few degrees inside the car. I decided to drive past them, not stop, not roll down my window, just pass and get through the fog. It was the only plan my mind could form. I shifted my foot to the gas pedal and eased forward, careful not to accelerate too quickly on the slick road. As the car approached the figure, I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing the urge to stare directly at them. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud enough that it almost drowned out the sound of the engine. As I passed, the fog thickened so much that I could barely see a foot beyond the hood. The figure disappeared from the corner of my vision. For a moment, everything felt suspended, sound, light, movement, like driving through a dream. I could feel the weight of the figure's presence beside me, though I couldn't see them. It felt like someone was standing inches from my window, watching. The fog clung to the glass like fingertips pressed lightly against it. Then I felt it, a soft thump on the side of the car. Not loud, not violent, just a gentle tap like the brush of a hand or the shift of weight against metal. I inhaled sharply but didn't slow down. I just kept driving, willing the fog to thin, willing the world to return to normal. After several long seconds, the fog began to lift. The air lightened, the daylight-colored softness returned, and the white veil slowly peeled back to reveal the familiar two-lane road stretching ahead. When I finally glanced in my rearview mirror, I expected to see nothing but fog lingering in the dip. But instead, I saw the silhouette again, standing at the exact edge of the fog bank, facing the direction my car had gone. They hadn't moved to follow me, but the position of their heads suggested they were watching. I drove the rest of the way to work in near silence, the heater clicking faintly as it warmed. When I parked behind the store and stepped out, the cold morning air should have been refreshing, but instead it felt thick, like the fog hadn't fully left me. I walked around to check the side of my car, more out of a need for reassurance than expectation. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then near the rear door, I noticed something odd, a faint, smeared mark on the paint. It wasn't dirt or mud. It looked more like a long, pale streak of condensation, the kind left behind when someone drags cold fingers across a warm surface. It vanished within an hour. I told myself it was just moisture from the fog, but part of me didn't believe that. I avoided driving through that dip in the road for weeks. I took a longer route, even when I was running late. But one morning, months later, curiosity made me glance toward the dip from the hill above it as I drove past. The fog was back, and just at the edge of it, barely visible behind the frost of my window, was the same silhouette, perfectly still, perfectly waiting. I didn't slow down, I didn't look again, and I haven't driven that road in the early morning since. Because every time I picture that shape standing in the fog, I keep thinking the same quiet, unsettling thought. It wasn't standing there waiting for help. It was standing there waiting for someone to notice. I used to drive long-haul routes for a small logistics company that mostly handled regional deliveries. Nothing major, nothing cross-country. Just the kind of work that keeps you on the road for hours at a time with nothing but the rumble of the engine and the glow of the dashboard to keep you company. Most nights were surprisingly peaceful. The highway at 2 or 3 a.m. has its own kind of quiet, not silence exactly, but a steady rhythm that makes you feel like you're drifting through an empty world. I liked those hours more than I expected. The lane markers sliding past in the headlights, the low hum of the tires, the faint buzz from the radio even when it was off. You get used to that stillness, the way it settles into your bones. You learn to trust the road. The night everything happened, I had been driving for nearly 6 hours straight, heading back toward my home base after dropping off a load 2 states over. The sky was overcast, the moon swallowed by clouds, and the air had the sort of coolness that usually comes just before dawn. I wasn't tired yet, just comfortably exhausted, that stage where everything feels soft around the edges like you're floating along instead of driving. The highway stretch I was on was familiar. I knew where the rest stops were, where the pavement dipped slightly near mile marker 178, even where the wind tended to push the trailer a little from the right. I'd taken the same route dozens of times. Maybe that's why I didn't question it when I saw the exit sign. It was a simple blue sign with white text pointing toward a rest stop 3 miles ahead. Normally, I used a different exit on that route, exit 212, but I didn't remember a rest stop being available at 209. Still, signs come and go. Construction updates things all the time. The idea of stretching my legs for a minute appealed to me more than usual. I had been gripping the wheel tighter than I realized, and my shoulders ached from a knot that had been forming since midnight. So when the exit ramp came into view, a long, slightly curved stretch of asphalt, I took it without thinking twice. At first, everything looked normal. The ramp sloped gently downward, lined by patches of grass and a few trees on either side. The truck's headlights washed over the pavement, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. But as I reached the bottom, I noticed something odd. There were no lights. Rest stops usually have at least a few lamps glowing in the distance or illuminated signs, but the darkness ahead was complete, as if the exit led into a pocket of night untouched by anything artificial. Still, the road beneath me felt solid. I kept going. The ramp fed into a straight road that stretched ahead like a black ribbon, my headlights barely managing to reveal more than 40 or 50 feet at a time. The trees on both sides grew denser, their branches reaching overhead in irregular arcs that made the darkness feel heavier, almost like I was driving into a tunnel made of branches and shadow. I checked the dashboard clock, 3:14 a.m. Not that late, but isolation at that hour feels more intense than it does during the day. I told myself the rest stop was probably just farther in, maybe hidden by the tree line. A few minutes passed, then a few more. No rest stop appeared. The road stayed perfectly straight, perfectly empty, and unsettlingly narrow. I slowed down, the engine shifting into a softer growl. When I glanced at the GPS mounted near the radio, the screen caught my eye for the first time since I'd left the highway. It wasn't showing any route, no map, just a pale, static glow. I tapped it once, then twice. Nothing changed. The system hadn't frozen, it was still responsive, but it wasn't showing anything. No data, no directions, no roads. Just an empty blank field. A small ripple of unease slid down my back. I turned the radio on, hoping the chatter of late-night stations might ground me, but static hissed through the speakers. I tried switching channels, more static. Eventually, I turned it off, leaving only the sound of the engine and the faint rasp of tires on asphalt. A minute later, something changed. A faint glow appeared behind me, headlights. Not close, not approaching fast, just present. At first I felt relieved. Another driver meant I wasn't alone on whatever road this was, but as the lights grew brighter, something didn't feel right. They were too bright for a car, too low for a truck, and too steady for something bouncing over uneven pavement. The light didn't flicker or sway. It was perfectly stable, as if mounted on something that moved without any vibration at all. I expected to hear an engine behind me, but there was nothing. Only silence thickening with each passing second. As I kept driving, the light kept following. At one point, I slowed down enough to make out the shape of the vehicle behind me, or at least I tried to. But the headlights were so bright they washed out everything around them. I could see no grille, no hood, no silhouette. Just two bright orbs of white that stayed exactly the same distance behind me no matter how I adjusted my speed. 45 miles per hour, 50, 40, it didn't matter. The headlights mirrored every move, perfectly synchronized like they were tethered to my truck. As a quiet, heavy tension settled into my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights weren't following me by accident. They were following me because they were meant to, because they had been waiting for me to take that exit. The road ahead continued straight, long past where any rest stop should have been. I passed no intersecting roads, no signs, no buildings, just the same endless strip of pavement marked by nothing. Eventually, the unease became too much. I eased the truck toward the shoulder, though the edge of the road didn't look like a shoulder at all, just a slightly lighter shade of darkness. I stopped. The headlights behind me stopped too, holding their distance. The moment I turned off my engine, the night became unnervingly quiet. No insects, no wind, no rustling trees, just the soft ticking of metal cooling and the hum of my own pulse. I lowered the window a crack to listen. Nothing came through except colder air. So I waited for the vehicle behind me to pass, but it didn't. It just sat there, idling silently, or maybe not idling at all. I couldn't hear an engine. I couldn't hear anything. Something inside me twisted. Finally, I climbed down from the cab, the gravel under my boots sounding too loud in the otherwise dead atmosphere. I walked a few steps toward the rear of the truck, keeping my flashlight pointed downward. The air felt heavier near the ground, like fog was trying to form but couldn't quite commit. I forced myself to keep moving until I reached the back bumper and peeked around it. The lights were gone. Not off gone, the road behind me was pitch black. No headlights, no vehicle, no sound. I stood there for a long moment trying to understand what I was seeing. My brain kept insisting I had misjudged the distance or angle, that the vehicle had turned off or reversed quietly. But the road was straight, flat, and completely empty. When I walked back to the cab and climbed inside, I noticed something I hadn't before. My truck's clock wasn't showing the correct time anymore. The numbers flickered faintly, stuck between digits, like it was trying to reset but couldn't. A cold, prickling feeling slid across my skin. That was when I decided to get off that road. I started the engine, U-turned carefully, and headed back in the direction I'd come from. The trees seemed denser now, leaning in closer. The darkness felt thicker, more oppressive. After a few minutes, I realized something was wrong. I had been driving long enough that I should have reached the exit ramp again, but the road just kept stretching ahead infinitely, like I was looping through the same piece over and over. I checked the odometer. I had already gone farther than the length of the exit ramp itself, twice. Still no highway, no signs, no markers. Just an endless road. Eventually, without warning, the trees thinned. The sky brightened by a shade, and the highway emerged ahead of me, sudden and jarring, like stepping out of a dream you didn't know you were trapped in. I merged back on without looking back, my hands shaking just enough to make the steering wheel quiver under my grip. When I checked the highway signs, I realized I wasn't near exit 209, or 212, or even within 10 miles of either. Somehow, I had come out more than 20 miles south of where I should have been, on a completely different stretch of highway. Later, when I tried to find that exit again in daylight with a full tank and a clear head, there was nothing there. Just a continuation of the same guardrails and green exit signs I'd always known. No rest stop, no turnoff, no ramp. Sometimes, late at night when the highway is empty and the wind is low, I swear I still catch glimpses of bright white headlights in my mirrors, hovering at a distance, perfectly still, perfectly centered, waiting for me to make the wrong turn again. I used to pick up rides for a rideshare service before sunrise, mostly because the early hours paid better and the streets were quiet enough that the drives felt peaceful. There was something strangely calming about being awake before the rest of the city, when the air still held the chill of night and the sky looked washed out and pale. I'd wait in my car with a warm cup of coffee and watch the world slowly brighten around the edges, headlights from the rare passing car gliding silently across the pavement. Most mornings carried the same rhythm. Pick up a couple of airport runs, maybe a nurse heading home from a night shift or a student trying to catch an early class. Nothing dramatic, just the steady, predictable quiet of a world that hadn't fully woken up yet. On the morning this happened, the air felt colder than usual, colder in a way that made me turn up the heater even though I hadn't been outside long. My phone buzzed with a ride request from a gated community about 15 minutes away, a place I'd picked up from a handful of times. It was one of those neighborhoods built within the last decade, all clean sidewalks and trimmed hedges, where every house looked like a slight variation of the next. The people there were usually early risers, professionals catching flights, families heading to school, older couples going to medical appointments. I'd never once driven through at dawn and not seen at least one or two porch lights still on. That morning, though, something felt different as I approached the main gate. The street outside the walls looked unusually dim, not just shadowy but strangely muted, as if the air itself was dulling the brightness. The gate was open, which was normal for early morning, but there were no other cars coming or going. I didn't think much of it at first. Some days were just slower than others. But the moment my tires passed the entrance, the temperature inside the car dropped, not dramatically, just by a subtle degree that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. The heater kept blowing warm air, yet the cabin felt colder. I drove slowly down the main street the way I always did, expecting the usual signs of life. A jogger, a porch light, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, but the neighborhood was silent, not quiet, silent. Every window I passed had its blinds pulled down to the same level. Every house sat in complete darkness. I checked the clock again. 4:07 a.m., not so early that no one would be awake. Usually by this hour, I'd see a kitchen light glowing or hear the distant hum of a garage door opening. But there was nothing. Even the security lamps, the ones built into the landscaping, seemed dimmer than usual, barely lighting the edges of the sidewalks. As I drove deeper, the silence grew heavier. It pressed against the windows, muffling the sound of my tires on the road. I noticed the absence of small things, no sprinklers clicking on, no motion-activated lights sweeping across driveways, no cars warming up for early commutes. It felt as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. I tried calling the passenger using the in-app dialer, something I always did when the pickup location seemed too quiet. But the call didn't ring. The screen flickered and immediately ended the attempt. I tried again, same result. I looked down at my phone, full bars, battery at 78%, nothing wrong. Still, the call wouldn't go through. I turned down the street where the passenger was supposed to be waiting. The houses here sat just a little closer together, like the developers had tried to pack more into the same amount of space. I slowed the car even more, watching for movement behind the blinds or a figure stepping outside. But every house looked identical, blinds closed, porch dark, driveway empty. I checked the app again. The passenger icon hovered right at the midpoint of this street, yet no one was outside. Normally, the app struggles with exact locations in gated communities, but I'd never seen it place a rider dead center on a street like that, almost like it wasn't tied to a specific house. The longer I sat there, the more the quiet bothered me. There's a difference between a neighborhood that's asleep and one that feels abandoned. And this place didn't feel asleep. It felt wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting another car to turn in behind me, but the street remained empty. I debated canceling the ride, telling myself maybe the passenger had ordered by mistake. But something held me there, a strange pull I couldn't explain. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I just didn't want to believe something was off. As after a few moments, I put the car in park and rolled the window down slightly, hoping to hear something, anything. The cold air drifted in with a faint smell of dew and wet concrete. But no birds, no insects, not even the distant hum of a highway. Just a flat, complete absence of sound, the kind that made my ears feel like they were straining to catch something that wasn't there. I was about to roll the window back up when a soft creak broke the silence. It came from one of the houses, then another, then another. The sound repeated, faint but distinct, the slow, gentle sound of door hinges shifting. I scanned the row of houses, heart thudding in my chest, and then I saw it. As every front door on the street was open, not wide, not enough to be obvious at first glance, but cracked open by an inch or two. Every single one. A cold ripple ran through me so fast my fingers numbed around the steering wheel. I stared at the nearest house, trying to convince myself the door had already been ajar when I passed earlier. But I knew it hadn't. I would have noticed. I kept staring, waiting for someone to step out, maybe a homeowner coming to grab the newspaper or check the morning air. But no one appeared. The doors stayed perfectly still, cracked open like slightly parted lips. Something inside me whispered that I needed to get out of there. But before I could shift back into drive, I heard it again, another creak, but this one deeper, more deliberate. It came from farther down the street. Then from behind me, a subtle scraping sound like the shuffle of feet against pavement. I looked into the mirror, expecting to see someone walking, but the street behind me was empty. A cold dread settled into my throat. Something was moving in this neighborhood, but I couldn't see what. I shifted into drive and hit the gas, keeping my speed controlled so I didn't draw attention to myself. My hands trembled slightly as I passed the houses. I avoided looking directly at the doors, but in the corner of my eye I could see them, all cracked open, all still, like every house was quietly waiting for something to come through. When I reached the end of the street, I expected to loop back to the main road easily. But every turn I took led me deeper into the neighborhood instead of out. The streets began to blend together, repeating patterns of identical houses and identical driveways. I passed the same cracked doors from different angles, the same mailbox numbers appearing where they shouldn't be. At one point, I turned left and realized it was the third time I'd turned left into that exact street, even though I had taken completely different roads to get there. My GPS refused to reload. The screen glowed blank again. My phone wouldn't call out. The cabin grew colder despite the heater running at full strength. Then, at one particularly sharp turn, my headlights swept across a street that hadn't been there before, wider, flatter, stretching straight toward the exit gate. Relief surged through me so quickly I nearly laughed. I sped toward it, not caring about speed limits or camera signs. The gate stood open just like before, the outside world visible beyond it. But as I passed through it, something made me glance back in the mirror. The neighborhood, with its identical houses and silent streets and cracked open doors, wasn't there. Just darkness, like the entire place had never existed. When I got home that morning, my ride history showed the entire trip lasting only 3 minutes, even though I'd been inside that neighborhood for much longer. I told myself it was a glitch. That exhaustion had played tricks on me, that I'd imagined the doors. But sometimes, early in the morning when I pick up passengers near the outskirts of town, I see a faint outline of a gate farther down the road, one that isn't connected to any real neighborhood. And the air around it always feels colder. It's like something behind it never woke up at all. I used to take the same shortcut home every evening, a narrow two-lane road that cut behind a stretch of open fields and quiet woods before reconnecting to the main highway. It wasn't the fastest route, but it felt comforting in its own way, peaceful, secluded, and usually empty, except for the occasional cyclist or someone walking their dog just before sunset. The kind of road where the hum of the engine felt louder than the world itself, where the fading daylight stretched long shadows across the asphalt and the air smelled faintly of soil and dry grass. It became part of my routine without me even realizing it. By the time I left work, my body simply steered me toward that turn out of habit, trusting the calm, predictable nature of that road. On the evening this happened, the sky looked heavier than usual, dimmer, like the sun was sinking faster than it should. I didn't think much of it. It was late autumn, the days were shorter, and the air had that cold bite that crept into the car even with the windows closed. I turned onto the side road as I always did, letting the trees narrow around me on both sides. The branches overhead formed a loose canopy, catching what little light remained and filtering it into soft, uneven patches across the pavement. I remember turning the radio down so I could enjoy the stillness a little longer. The world felt muted, the kind of quiet that makes you slow down without realizing it. About halfway down the road, I noticed something by the shoulder, a figure. At first I thought it was a jogger or someone walking home from one of the nearby houses hidden behind the tree line. The silhouette was unmistakably human, standing near the edge of the pavement. I eased off the accelerator slightly, not wanting to pass too fast if someone needed help. As I got closer, though, I realized the figure wasn't moving. Not shifting weight, not stepping forward, not waving. Just standing there with one arm lifted, bent at the elbow like they were trying to get someone's attention. But the arm wasn't waving, it wasn't even shaking. It looked frozen in place. A small ripple of unease slid into my stomach. I slowed down further, the tires crunching softly on a strip of loose gravel. My headlights illuminated more of the figure, a person wearing something dark, maybe a coat, standing unnaturally still. Their face was turned toward the road, but the angle of the evening light kept it in shadow, making it impossible to see any features. I rolled the window up fully even though it was already almost closed, a reflex I didn't fully understand. Something about the posture felt wrong. People don't stand like that with their arm raised so rigidly as if they were caught mid-motion and couldn't finish it. As I passed, I kept my eyes forward, pretending I wasn't bothered. I didn't want to stare, didn't want to meet the face I couldn't clearly see. but I couldn't stop myself from glancing in the rearview mirror a few seconds later, just to make sure they weren't stepping into the road or doing anything dangerous. The figure had lowered their arms, and they were walking toward the cars. Not running, not stumbling, walking slowly, calmly, almost deliberately, the way someone walks when they have nowhere else to go but toward you. My chest tightened. I sped up without meaning to, just enough to put distance between us. The road ahead dipped slightly, curving to the right, and for a moment the trees swallowed the shoulder from view. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe they had been stretching or flagging down someone else. Maybe they dropped something and bent to pick it up. Maybe the shadows made it look like they were moving differently than they were. But when I reached the next straight stretch and checked the mirror again, the figure was still there. Closer than they should have been. I pressed a little harder on the gas, the engine responding with a low growl. The car felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were pushing in. The back window reflected only my taillights bouncing against the road, but the mirror showed the silhouette growing steadily larger, each step somehow covering more distance than the last. I couldn't understand how they were keeping pace. I was driving at least 25 now, maybe 30. No one walks that fast. No one moves like that. A prickling sensation crept up the back of my neck, the kind that tells you're being watched even when you can't see who's watching. I swallowed hard and focused on the road ahead. The trees thinned slightly near the old bridge, and I knew a small crossroad was coming up, one that could take me toward town instead of deeper into the woods. I turned sharply without signaling, hoping the angle would make the figure disappear from view. For a moment, it worked. The curve hid everything behind me. The tension in my shoulders eased just enough for me to exhale. But when the road straightened and the mirror caught the area behind me again, my breath froze in my throat. The figure stood at the edge of the intersecting road. It was exactly at the spot where the woods ended and the pavement began. Not running, not panting, just there as if they had been waiting for me to make the turns. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I didn't understand how it was possible. No shortcuts, no trails, no paths through the dense trees that connected where I had been with where I was now. But the figure was closer than ever, close enough now that I could see the outline of their head tilt slightly, like they were examining something across the distance. I accelerated hard, the car jerking forward. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out the sound of the engine. For several minutes, I didn't look in the mirror at all, afraid to confirm whether they were following. The road widened as it neared the outskirts of town, and yellow streetlights flickered to life in the distance. The presence of artificial light gave me just enough courage to check the mirror again. The road behind me was empty. Completely empty. Relief washed through me in a shaky, uneven wave. I kept driving until I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, parked near the entrance, and took a few deep breaths before stepping out. The cold air soothed my overheated skin. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, grounding me in reality again. I tried to brush off the memory, telling myself stress had made me overinterpret shadows and distance. But then, as I walked toward the store entrance, something caught my eye near the edge of the property, a dark figure standing at the tree line, half hidden behind the first row of pine trunks. Their arm was raised again, bent at that same unnatural angle, perfectly still, perfectly silent. I froze in place, the cold air turning sharper around me. I blinked once, twice, but the figure didn't shift. It didn't step forward, it didn't lower its arm. It just stood there, partially obscured by bark and darkness, as if waiting for me to notice it. When I finally managed to move, I hurried inside and stayed there longer than I needed to, pretending to browse shelves I didn't care about. The clerk gave me a strange look when I kept glancing toward the window, but I didn't care. When I finally stepped outside again, the figure was gone. I drove straight home that night and didn't take the side road again. Not that week, not that month, not ever. But every now and then, when I pass any quiet stretch of woods at dusk, I catch myself looking at the edge of the trees, searching for a silhouette that shouldn't be there. An arm bent at an impossible angle, a stillness too deliberate to be human. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I see someone standing there. Awaiting. I've always had this habit of stopping at a small overlook on my way home from work, especially on nights when my head feels too full or the day has dragged on longer than it should. It isn't anything special, just a pull-off along a rural road with a view of the valley and a narrow ribbon of river cutting through it. But at night, when everything is dark except for a few scattered house lights in the distance, it becomes one of the quietest places I know. Sometimes I sit there with the engine running and let the silence settle around me until my breathing finally slows. Other nights, I turn everything off, roll the window down an inch, and listen to the faint wind moving across the grass. It feels like a pause between two parts of my life, the part where I'm still trying to process the day and the part where I'm supposed to act normal again once I walk through my front door. On the night this happened, the air was colder than usual. Not winter cold, but the kind that slips into your sleeves and lingers against your skin longer than it should. The sky was moonless, just a thick blanket of clouds that made the world feel smaller. My headlights washed across the gravel as I pulled into the overlook. I left the engine running at first, letting the warm air continue to circulate while I leaned back in my seat. As the ticking sound of the cooling hood blended with the steady hum of the blower, and for a moment I felt completely alone in the best way. Just me, my thoughts, and the faint smell of pine drifting in through the cracked window. I almost didn't notice the other car at first. I was looking at the valley, thinking about nothing in particular when headlights appeared behind me on the road. They were distant at first, just two small white dots drifting closer. I assumed it was just someone else stopping to enjoy the view or take a break from driving. But as the lights approached the entrance to the pull-off, something about the angle felt familiar. As I leaned forward a little, watching through the mirror as the car slowed and turned into the lot, gravel crunching softly under its tires. The car that pulled in beside me was the same model as mine. Same color, same shape, same year even if I had to guess. That wasn't too strange on its own. My car was a common sedan, nothing rare. But when it parked just a few feet away and the headlights turned off, I noticed something that made my pulse stutter slightly. The scratches on the front bumper, faint but visible under the reflection of my own headlights, matched mine exactly. The small dent on the passenger door, the one I'd gotten at a grocery store 2 years earlier, was there too. Even the little square sticker on the back window, the one from a roadside coffee shop I had visited once, gleamed faintly in the same spot. For a long moment I stared, unsure if I was imagining it. My brain tried to supply rational explanations. Maybe someone else had the same sticker, maybe dents and scratches were coincidental, but none of the logic settled right. The car looked too similar, identical in a way that didn't feel natural. I reached for my keys, half considering getting out to take a closer look, but something in my chest tightened, an instinctive pull telling me to stay seated. Then the cabin light in the other car flicked on. It wasn't bright, just a warm, soft glow, but it illuminated the inside clearly enough to show the outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. A silhouette, still, upright, facing forward. I couldn't see their face, not from the angle I was sitting, but I could see their shape well enough to notice something unsettling. It looked like me. Not in a detailed, obvious way. More in the way a shadow might suggest a familiar posture, the angle of the shoulders, the way the head tilted slightly to the left, even the way one hand rested on the lap while the other hovered near the console. The resemblance was close enough that my fingers went cold around the steering wheel. I didn't move, I just sat there and watched the silhouette through the darkness, unsure whether I should be afraid or curious. My breathing grew shallow without me meaning to change it. The other figure didn't turn their head or shift or react in any way. They just sat inside the car, illuminated only by that dim overhead light, like a passenger waiting for a ride that would never start. I finally decided it was time to leave. I reached down, turned off the heater, and shifted into reverse. But as my car rolled back, the other car rolled back too at the exact same speed, at the exact same angle, perfectly synchronized with mine. I froze. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms. I tried adjusting my speed to see if they were intentionally mimicking me, but the timing was too precise, almost mechanical. Every inch I moved backward was mirrored by the other car as if we were reflections of each other. A wave of cold panic washed through me. I straightened the wheel and pulled forward quickly, expecting the other car to respond again. It did, same movement, same timing, same exact distance kept between us. It didn't accelerate past me, didn't honk, didn't flash its lights. It just moved when I moved. When I pulled out onto the road, my heart hammered so loudly it felt like the sound was coming from outside my chest. I pressed the gas pedal harder than I meant to, the darkness blurring past the windows. The other car pulled out too, staying perfectly parallel in the reflection of my rearview mirror. I couldn't see the driver anymore, not clearly. But I saw the shape of the car's headlights right where they shouldn't be, not behind me, not in the oncoming lane, but beside me, as if it were glued to my movements. As the road curved, my car curved. The other car curved in perfect times. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at it anymore. Something about the perfect mimicry felt worse than being chased. Chasing is human. Matching every move without error is something else entirely. I pushed my speed up, trying to reach the brighter part of town as quickly as possible. Gradually, the spaced-out glow of streetlights appeared ahead, breaking through the darkness like small islands. And then suddenly, the other car wasn't there. Just gone. No headlights beside me, no silhouette, no shadow. The right lane was empty, clean, almost eerily normal. I didn't see it peel off, didn't see it slow down, didn't see it vanish behind a bend. It was just not there anymore. My hands were trembling when I pulled into my driveway. The relief of seeing my porch light felt overwhelming. Home looked more comforting than it had in months. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, trying to get my breathing under control. The night around me felt quiet again, truly quiet, not the kind of quiet that hides something behind it. I eventually stepped out, walked up the porch steps, and unlocked the door. When I reached the living room window, I pulled the curtain aside to look out one more time, not because I expected to see anything, but because I needed to prove to myself the world was normal again. The driveway showed only my car. The street was empty, the night was still. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint glow filtering through my bedroom window. It wasn't bright enough to light the room, but enough to cast a pale, shifting illumination across the wall. I sat up slowly. It was the glow of headlights. Not moving, just idling, just waiting. Nights on the road have a strange way of revealing things we're not meant to see. Sometimes it's just a feeling in the air or a shape you pass too quickly to understand, but other times it stays with you longer than it should. These stories remind us that the world changes after dark, not enough for most people to notice, but enough for a few unlucky ones to carry the memory home with them. And once you've seen a road the way they did, it never looks the same again. If you've ever driven alone at night, you probably understand that quiet tension, the way your headlights carve out a little island of safety, while everything outside them feels like it's holding its breath. We don't talk about that feeling much, but it's there, settling in the corners of your mind when the world grows still. Maybe that's why these stories linger. Not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they feel like moments any of us could stumble into without meaning to. If you want to hear more nights like this, more quiet confessions from dark stretches of road, you're welcome to stay with this channel. Subscribe if you'd like, or share these stories with someone who understands the pull of late-night roads. No pressure, just an open seat beside the rest of us who listen when the world goes quiet. For now, though, it's time to settle back into the light of your own home. Let the roads fade out behind you, let the silence soften, and let the unease drift off with the night. Sleep well, and if you're driving tomorrow, maybe stay on the main road, just in case.